The man, the myth, the Game Freak himself, Satoshi Tajiri, best known by you and I as the creator of Pokémon. And if you're as deep in the weeds on Pokémon's history as I am, i.e. very deep, you know the main beats of his time with the series. He worked on the first set of games as director and designer, did the same for the sequels, and soon after put game making behind him, currently serving as Game Freak's CEO. That's where the story ends for most folks, but I was always curious if Tajiri did anything else. Where's his name popped up outside the red and green, gold and silver bubbles? So I dug around to chronicle his other works, from the days he made active choices in Pokemon's world and long after. Given his near-hermit nature since the 2000s, info's not as plentiful as it is with some of his colleagues, but you likely haven't heard everything I'm talking about here. With that, let's go back to when Pokémon was still a budding franchise for some of Tajiri's other contributions, circa 1997. The first project is pretty obscure, but no less interesting. Utao Pokemon Zukan, or the Singing Pokemon Encyclopedia.
Singing Encyclopedia. Coming up, Normal Pokémon Part 1. Here we go.
This is a promotional CD with 4 Pokemon-themed tracks, surmising every bug and normal type in Gen 1. Internet Mythos claims it was given out to patrons of Space World 1997, though I can't find concrete proof of that. However, in December 97, it was used in a Japanese Nintendo 64 campaign called the W-Get campaign. If you bought an N64 from December 10th, 97 to January 31st, 1998, this CD came as a bonus alongside 2 exclusive Pokemon cards. Even more interesting, the lyrics for all 4 tracks are penned by Satoshi Tajiri himself. Sorta. November 97 saw the release of Game Boy Entire Pokemon Sounds Collection CD, an official soundtrack for Red and Green. It also had all 151 of the game's dex entries, read aloud by Shinichiro Miki, voice of the anime Pokédex. I bring this album up because comparing its entries to the Singing Dex ones, the latter recycled the former's wholesale. All that's new is the melody they're sung to. Here's a few examples.
きめ細かくしなやかな体毛はうっとりするほど毛皮は高級品だ 集団で現れることもある猛スピードで飛び回りお尻の毒針で刺しまくる
集団で現れることもある猛スピードで飛び回りお尻の毒針で刺しまくる
This indirectly confirms Tajiri wrote some dex entries for Gen 1. Who's to say if he wrote more, but we know for a fact he did at least 28, almost a fifth of the Kanto roster. For the singing decks, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't work with the music crew and they just credited him for his text, but again, who's to say? Oh, and for an extra fun fact, a Pokemon's cry plays before its respective verse, but for Pinsir, they accidentally play Tauros' cry, so it gets heard twice on this CD. Something Tajiri undoubtedly worked on were some albums based on the Pokemon anime. For 98's Sound Picture Box, It's a White Tomorrow Team Rocket, he was credited with Original Plan. Not to be confused with Project Planner, that was left to others, but to wager a guess, maybe he laid the groundwork for this? There's 2 tracks here from the games adapted with lyrics, so he might have contributed there. Tajiri would serve the same role for 1999's Birth of Mewtwo Sound Picture Box, which featured the eponymous radio drama and the first movie's soundtrack. Curiously, these are the only Pokemon CDs to ever use the term Sound Picture Box. Maybe it's a term Tajiri coined, who knows? On the subject of the first movie, at its first public unveiling dated November 13th, 97, Tajiri appeared alongside the movie's staff. This was covered in the January 98 issue of Animedia magazine, which notes Tajiri was helping with the film's original concept, and Animedia was curious if it had referenced the then upcoming Gold and Silver, which it did in terms of new Pokemon and a few new moves. As for original concept, we can only guess, but for the Mewtwo CD, he's only credited for work on Disc 1, which is everything related to the radio drama. My guess would be general world building and lore. Speaking of which, Tajiri also helped with some aspects of the show proper. As explained in the July 2000 issue of Nintendo Online magazine, Tajiri made a chart ranking every Pokemon's intelligence, determining if they could understand human speech or even talk like a human themselves. The concepts definitely evolved over time, but that's what was originally laid out, and is why Meowth from Team Rocket's as smart as he is. I think he really liked Meowth. I mean, look at this picture from '96 where he's accepting an award. If that's not Meowth bias, I don't know what is. Anyway, Tajiri also hinted we could see Pokemon other than Meowth speak in the show someday. Though when he made this comment, we already saw that twice with Ghastly and Slowking. Guess no one kept him in the loop. Now to take a closer look at his work on the Pokemon games, and his involvement may surprise you. Gen 1 was the only time we saw Tajiri's designer and director work unfiltered. He was back in the director's chair for Gen 2 before it got a complete overhaul from his right-hand man Junichi Masuda mid-development, which is what's seen in the final game. The Johto from the Space World 97 demo was Tajiri's original vision, and where Gen 1 covered Japan's Kanto region, Gen 2 would have all of Japan as the region. However, that didn't leave much memory for the towns and everything was squished together. Kanto was also in this build, but it was crammed into a single city. Ironically, the bigger the game got, the smaller it felt. Even though Tajiri's Johto was cast aside, the final game still credits him as the main director. For Crystal, he was credited as executive director, and while Gold and Silver also credit him for game design, that credit's gone in Crystal, as again, this Johto was all Masuda's. After Gen 2 wrapped up, Tajiri slowly reeled back from game development as well as the public eye. Through the 80s and 90s, he had shown up in TV shows, magazines, and did several interviews, but this would soon be a thing of the past. With Pokemon's third generation, Tajiri arguably made his final mark on the games here. He once again served as executive director, which is different from executive producer, but looking it up, they both seem to cover things like company management, making business decisions, etc. For the Gen 1 remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, he got his hands a bit dirtier there. At E3 2004, IGN interviewed Masuda and Pokemon bigwig Tsunekazu Ishihara, and they asked how involved Tajiri was with the remakes. Ishihara said Tajiri supervised them from start to finish, approving all the text and the new features added. In-game, he's credited with Game Scenario, alongside designer and composer Hitomi Sato. Earlier in that interview, IGN asked why Pokemon's had such staying power, with Ishihara giving the typical answer about kids liking it, but before that he said, because Masuda does a good job. He said it with a laugh, but knowing what we know now, he's not kidding. Around this time, Tajiri was featured on an episode of Game Center CX, a gaming variety show hosted by Shinya Arino in one of the biggest interviews Tajiri ever did. He goes over the history of Game Freak, has a Pokemon battle with Arino, it's a great watch. They also answer questions from fans, with one kid asking why the Gen 3 games used Braille for some puzzles. And being the unlucky North American I am, not getting a Braille chart packed in, I'd ask that too, but with more ire. Tajiri said he loved the idea of being able to read something just by touch alone. Thinking of all the languages Pokemon got translated into, he would have liked seeing a Braille version one day. With touchable Pokemon you could decipher by shape. Braille's usage was expanded on in Volume 84 of Nintendo Dream, where Masuda says he added it to the game after noticing it was used all around his neighborhood. Realizing how cool it was, he wanted others to learn about it too. They even went so far as to add Braille onto Game Freak's business cards, which Masuda still had on his circa 2016. Quick aside, we also get a look at Tajiri's card here, which has a Ho-Oh on it, and it somehow got in the possession of an average civilian, assuming it's legit. Back to Game Center trivia though, Tajiri was asked what his favorite Pokemon was, with him saying Poliwag. He said this before in the Japan-only 1996 Pokédex guidebook, but an issue of Famimaga 64 has him say it's Poliwhirl, and on Game Center he's got a Poliwrath. He even teased Politoed months after Red and Green came out, so I think he likes them all. They also talked about game design here, with Tajiri saying he enjoyed WarioWare Mega Micro games and its instant pickup and play style, wishing he made something like that before they beat him to it. Arino is curious what Tajiri's next big game idea was gonna be, though Tajiri didn't give a clear answer. He did say his past games centered on a key verb like flipping for Mendel Palace / Quinty or catching for Pokémon, and whatever was next would follow that pattern. But it seems that day never came. After Gen 3, he was credited as executive producer on every Game Freak title to date, sometimes with other execs, other times flying solo. From what I've seen, that can be a very involved role or given out of courtesy. It can even be done posthumously like a special thanks credit. Looking at his Moby Games page, the most recent game he's credited for as of this video, Pocket Card Jockey Ride On, had him serve as senior producer, which might be the same thing as executive producer in this case. To delve deeper into his current role, we have to jump ahead to a 2018 Game Informer feature on Pokemon's history, where they visited Game Freak HQ and spoke to some of the staff. Talking to studio co-founder Masuda, he expanded a bit more on Tajiri's contributions, saying, "Tajiri really serves the role of executive producer on all of the games. Depending on the project, he will look at the game and be more hands-on, but a lot of his time is spent researching various media forms. When it comes to running the company and doing game development and press interviews, he just kinda leaves that up to me." So from this, we know that just because he's Game Freak's CEO doesn't mean he runs the place, or in some cases even looks at a game. And researching various media forms. What kind of media forms and for what purposes? Have we seen these labors bear fruit? Whatever the case, he's keeping busy, I suppose. And somewhat related, Masuda left Game Freak in 2022 for his new role in the Pokemon Company as Chief Creative Fellow, so his previous role is someone else's now. Back to Tajiri, let's swing over to Gen 4, but it's a comparative drip feed. A lesser-known Tajiri appearance is actually found within a game itself, the Japan-only web browser title Pokémon Garden, made to promote the then-upcoming Diamond and Pearl. One of its features was the Game Freak office, which showcased developers in short videos, namely Tajiri, Masuda, and other Game Freak co-founder Ken Sugimori. I must have seen that Sugimori video where he draws Gengar a million times, but I didn't know its origin till the 2020s, much less the Tajiri footage. Explains the crummy video quality, and as far as I know, it's the most recent video of Tajiri to date. For game supervision, he alongside fellow Game Freak staff like, you guessed it, Masuda and Sugimori, oversaw the studio's content for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and later Smash Wii U / 3DS and Smash Ultimate. The first two Smash games just had Tajiri credited as original director from Pokémon, so I'd say this is a more involved role. And that's pretty much it for games, but talking about music again, he's done much more in that field. Checking his VGMDB page, he's received special thanks on a lot of Pokémon CDs, which, again, could mean anything, but things don't end there in some cases. After the aforementioned anime albums, there was an 11-year absence from Tajiri until the Black and White Super Music Collection, where he was a supervisor. He'd do the same for the sequel games in 2012 and for the Red and Green and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee collections, released in 2016 and 18 respectively. Then in 2024, he oversaw 3 collections, covering Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet. Keep in mind, these aren't all the collections out there. There's ones for X and Y, the Hoenn remakes, Sun and Moon, but for some reason Tajiri was more involved with these ones, though for Kanto I totally understand. The mid to late 2010s also saw him, surprisingly, partake in some interview-based projects. On February 8, 2016, he and Sugimori interviewed Masanobu Endo, creator of the 1983 shoot-'em-up Xevious, which was a huge inspiration for Pokémon and other Game Freak titles. Tajiri went so far as to say Pokémon wouldn't exist if not for Xevious. This interview presumably took place at Game Freak HQ, if the Pokémon posters on the walls are any indication. As an aside, according to Game Freak staff, 2016 is when Tajiri was last seen around the office itself. When he dropped by, he reportedly offered advice to younger staff members and cut loose playing classic arcade games. Jumping ahead to 2018 again, that year saw the release of the biographical manga Satoshi Tajiri, the man who created Pokémon, or Pokémon wo Tsukuta Otoko, chronicling Tajiri's life story plus the creation of Game Freak and of course those little pocket monsters. But there's still one more piece of work to mention, and this baby came out in 2024. The book Games Are Made of Verbs, a guide for up-and-coming game designers which delves into Tajiri's creative philosophies. It's Japanese only, but the book is said to tackle the basics of game creation in ways that haven't been seen before. Tajiri handled the book's supervision and also wrote the foreword/preface dated to 2023. And underneath is a picture of him with a big old Mimikyu plushie, looking as happy as can be. And that brings us to the present day. I'd say Tajiri's been doing alright, but I'm still curious what he could do if he ever, pardon the pun, got back in the game. It stings seeing how passionate he was about making games until one day, it all just kinda stopped. Even weirder, it was just him who hung up his hat, at least among the familiar Game Freak names. Most of his friends and colleagues kept working on games long after he called it quits. One of those folks was fellow game legend and Japanese namesake of Gary Oak, Shigeru Miyamoto, who wrote the epilogue in Tajiri's autobiography, and I thought it fitting to close things out with said epilogue's final sentence. Quote, "I sincerely hope and believe that sleeping within Tajiri, dormant now perhaps, are personal experiences that he will once again use as the basis for creating a new, amazing game." And yeah, the feeling's mutual. Before Tajiri retires or leaves this mortal coil, I'd love to see a new game idea from him. Heck, I'll even settle for a new Pokémon design or concept. But the man undoubtedly made his mark, and he, along with Masuda, Sugimori, and the rest of those game freaks, will continue to inspire people for years to come. And if that's good enough for him, ever so begrudgingly, that's good enough for me. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed what you saw. If you did, feel free to give this video a like, share with a friend, subscribe, check out all my social media pages, my Patreon page where you can see videos like this before they go live, all that stuff I always go on about. Speaking of the Patreon, I'd like to give a shout out today to Lars Niswant and Munchie598 for their support. It really does mean more than you know. Thanks so much, guys. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of the videos I got on screen. I enjoyed making them, hopefully you'll enjoy watching them. And with all that said, I'll see you guys next time for another installment in this month of Pokemon. Catch you later!